Life has a peculiar way of surprising us when we least expect it. That day seemed as ordinary as any other, with the afternoon sun filtering through my car windows as I drove home. Traffic flowed normally, and my mind wandered between pending tasks and plans for the family dinner. I never imagined that in a matter of seconds, everything would change irrevocably. It was then that I felt that sharp, piercing pain in my chest, as if an invisible hand was squeezing my heart. I tried to maintain control of the steering wheel, but my hands began to shake uncontrollably. The world around me started to blur, and the last thing I remember was the deafening sound of metal twisting as my car crashed into the guardrail. The impact was brutal, but curiously I felt no pain. Everything became hazy, and the ambulance sirens sounded increasingly distant, as if they were coming through a long, dark tunnel. The paramedics' voices blended into a confusing cacophony as they struggled to keep me alive. In the hospital, the fluorescent ceiling lights passed over me like intermittent flashes while the medical team urgently transferred me to the emergency room. I could hear fragments of technical conversations, blood pressure numbers, and urgent orders to obtain different medications. Everything seemed to be happening in slow motion and, at the same time, at a dizzying speed. It was at that moment when I experienced something extraordinary. I found myself floating above my own body. I could see with perfect clarity the doctors working frantically, their faces tense while performing resuscitation maneuvers. But what broke my heart the most was seeing my little Abigail, my youngest daughter, clinging to my lifeless hand, her tears falling silently on my pale skin. However, before I could fully process the anguish of seeing my daughter in such a state of affliction, I was enveloped by a warm and comforting light. It was different from any light I had seen before. It didn't hurt the eyes, but seemed to embrace the soul with indescribable warmth. All my worries, fears, and pains instantly dissipated, replaced by a peace that transcended any human understanding. And then I heard it. A voice that resonated with infinite love and compassion. A voice that seemed to know every corner of my being. As I turned, there he was. Jesus, radiant and majestic, yet so close and accessible that I felt as if I were reuniting with an old friend. His presence emanated a serene authority, and a love so profound that I felt completely overwhelmed. "Come with me," he said with a smile that contained all the wisdom of the universe. "There's something you need to see." He extended his hand toward me, and without hesitating for an instant, I took it. At that moment, I felt as if every cell of my being vibrated in perfect harmony with creation itself. We began walking along a path that seemed to be made of pure light. Each step we took produced waves of light that expanded like ripples in a crystalline pond. The air itself seemed to be alive, charged with an energy that nourished the spirit and renewed the soul. Around us I saw figures dressed in white moving with supernatural grace, their faces radiant with joy and peace. "Who are they?" I asked, although deep in my being I already knew the answer. "They are the saints," Jesus responded, his voice full of paternal pride. "Those who chose the path of love and service during their time on earth." As we advanced, I could observe these blessed souls more closely. Some wore crowns that shone with a supernatural radiance, adorned with precious stones that seemed to contain entire galaxies within them. Each jewel, Jesus explained to me, represented an act of selfless love, a moment of sacrifice, a decision to choose good over evil. While we observed these blessed souls, one in particular caught my attention. An elderly man who approached with trembling steps to where we were. His face was furrowed with wrinkles that spoke of a life of service and dedication, but his eyes shone with a light that seemed to contain all the wisdom of the universe. Jesus received him with an embrace that conveyed a love so deep that I felt tears spring from my eyes. "This is Miguel," Jesus explained tenderly. For 70 years he was a street sweeper in a small city. No one knew his name. Few noticed his presence, but every morning he rose before dawn to keep the streets clean, always with a smile on his face. Whenever he found someone sad or in need, he shared his meager lunch, or simply offered words of encouragement. He never sought recognition, never asked for anything in return. As Jesus spoke, a crown began to materialize above Miguel's head. It was different from all the ones I had seen until then, apparently simple, but with an inner glow that seemed to emanate from each of its jewels. Each precious stone contained scenes from his life, moments when he had helped elderly people cross the street, Times when he had found lost objects and spent hours looking for their owners. Nights when he had shared his dinner with homeless people. True greatness, Jesus continued, is not measured by the applause you receive, but by the lives you touch when no one is looking. This revelation hit me with the force of a wave. I thought about all the times I had sought recognition, about the occasions when I had measured my worth by the praise received or achievements attained. Here, in this place where truth was revealed in its purest form, all of that seemed so insignificant. We continued our tour along what appeared to be a grand avenue paved with pure gold. The material gleamed beneath our feet, but not with the ostentatious shine we know on earth, rather with a warm light that seemed to emanate from within. Each step we took produced waves of light that expanded like circles in a pond, creating patterns of indescribable beauty. Around us, I saw more blessed souls, each with their own story of love and service. A young woman, whom I knew had been a teacher in a marginalized neighborhood, wore a crown adorned with stones that shone with the colors of the rainbow. Each gem represented a student whose life she had transformed with her dedication and unconditional love. Maria, Jesus explained to me, never had much in material terms. Her salary barely covered her living expenses, but each month she set aside a portion to buy school supplies for children who couldn't afford them. She spent extra hours after class helping students who had difficulties, and many times used her own money to buy food for those who came to school hungry. I saw scenes from her life reflected in the jewels of her crown. Nights spent preparing special materials for her students. Moments when she embraced children who came to class with bruises and broken hearts. Occasions when she defended her students before school authorities who wanted to expel them for their difficult behavior. Each of these jewels, Jesus continued, represents a life transformed by her love. Some of her students became successful professionals. Others found the strength to break cycles of violence in their families. And all learned that their worth was not determined by their economic or family situation. As we watched, more souls approached to receive their crowns. I saw a doctor who had dedicated his life to caring for people in remote rural areas, never charging those who couldn't pay. His crown shone with the radiance of thousands of lives saved and pain relieved. I saw an elderly woman who had spent decades caring for abandoned children, her crown adorned with stones that contained the laughter and love of each little one who had found a home in her arms. Watch carefully, Jesus told me, pointing to a young man who was approaching. This is David. He died at 25 in an accident while helping evacuate his neighbors during a flood. His life was short in earthly years, but rich in love and sacrifice. The crown that materialized above David's head was extraordinary. Although he had had little time on earth, each moment of his brief life had been filled with acts of kindness and courage. The jewels of his crown shone with a particular intensity, showing scenes from his last day. The rising water, the cries for help, his unshakable determination as he helped family after family get to safety, until finally, he gave his life for others, Jesus said softly. There is no greater love than this. I felt a lump in my throat as I watched the final scene replayed in one of the jewels. David pushing a small child into the arms of rescuers moments before the current swept him away. His sacrifice had saved dozens of lives. We continued our tour, and each step revealed new wonders. We arrived at a garden of indescribable beauty, where each flower seemed to be made of crystallized light. The colors were more vibrant than anything I had seen on earth, and the air was filled with soft music that seemed to emanate from the flowers themselves. This is the Garden of Secret Acts, Jesus explained. Each flower represents an act of kindness performed in private, without seeking recognition or reward. These are heaven's most precious treasures. I approached a particularly beautiful flower, whose center seemed to contain a miniature galaxy. As I leaned in to observe it more closely, a scene unfolded before my eyes. An elderly woman silently buying groceries for a needy family, and leaving them at their door in the middle of the night, without leaving a note or expecting thanks. The purity of that act made the flower shine with an especially intense light. Each flower here, Jesus continued as we walked along paths that seemed woven with moonlight, represents a moment when someone chose love without expecting anything in return. Observe this one. He pointed to a delicate blue flower that swayed gently in a breeze I couldn't feel. In its petals I saw reflected the image of a young student who stayed after class each day to help a classmate with Down syndrome organize his materials, without anyone asking him to, without anyone noticing. Year after year in silence, being a faithful friend when others mocked or ignored. And here, said Jesus, guiding me toward a group of flowers that seemed to dance together, are the acts of love that transform generations. In these flowers I saw a single mother who, after working 2 shifts, spent hours at night sewing costumes so her children could participate in school plays like the other children. I saw her sacrificing her only moment of rest to create moments of joy that her little ones would remember all their lives. Her tears of exhaustion fell on the fabric, but her love turned each stitch into an act of worship. The most beautiful acts, Jesus explained with a smile that contained all the wisdom of the universe, are those that no one applauds, those that don't receive likes on social media, those that don't win awards or recognition. As we advanced through the garden, each flower revealed new stories of secret love. A man who anonymously paid the medical bills of strangers in difficulties, a girl who shared her lunch with a hungry classmate every day without telling anyone, a teenager who dedicated his afternoons to reading to elderly people in a nursing home, when his friends thought he was at sports practice. Look at this one, said Jesus, pointing to a flower that seemed to be made of crystal and light. In it I saw a priest who, for decades, rose 3 hours before dawn to pray for his community. No one knew of these solitary vigils, of these intimate conversations with me in the darkness of dawn. Year after year, while the city slept, he interceded for the sick, the lonely, the lost. The flowers extended as far as the eye could see, each containing stories that made my heart expand with emotion. I saw a teacher who used her own salary to buy new shoes for needy students, discreetly leaving them in their lockers. I saw a bus driver who waited an extra 5 minutes each morning for an elderly woman with difficulty walking, even though this meant receiving warnings for arriving late. These are the true heroes of the kingdom, said Jesus with a voice full of paternal pride. Those who serve without seeking to be served, who love without needing to be loved, who give without expecting to receive. We stopped in front of a group of flowers that seemed to be made of liquid light. In them I saw reflected moments from my own life that I had forgotten. Small acts of kindness that seemed insignificant at the time, but which here shone with an extraordinary light. Each act of love, explained Jesus, no matter how small it may seem, creates ripples in the ocean of eternity. Sometimes the simple act of smiling at someone who is having a difficult day can change the course of a life. The flowers began to sing, a melody so beautiful that words cannot describe it. It was the sound of pure love, of selfless service, of kindness that seeks no reward. Each note contained stories of sacrifice and devotion, of people who had chosen the path of love in moments when no one else noticed. This garden, continued Jesus, as we walked among flowers that seemed to contain northern lights in their petals, is a testimony that true love needs no applause. Each flower here represents a moment when someone chose to be light in the darkness, regardless of whether anyone else noticed. I stopped in front of a particularly moving flower. In it I saw a nurse who, after her 12-hour shift, stayed extra hours holding the hands of dying patients, so they wouldn't pass away alone. No one recorded these extra hours, no one paid for them. It was an act of pure love. The most sacred moments, whispered Jesus, are those that occur in the secrecy of the heart. When no one else is watching is when a person's true character is revealed. The garden seemed to extend infinitely, each new path revealing more flowers, more stories of secret love and silent sacrifice. I saw a man who for 30 years had visited his wife's grave every Sunday, keeping his love alive in the silence of his heart. I saw a teenager who dedicated her Saturdays to reading stories to children in the children's hospital, bringing a bit of magic to their lives. Each flower here, said Jesus, taking one that seemed to be made of starlight, is a reminder that true love needs no witnesses. These souls understood that true greatness is not in being seen by men, but in being faithful in secret. As we watched, new flowers began to bloom, each representing acts of love that were occurring at that very moment on earth. A mother praying silently for her prodigal son, a child sharing his snack with a lonely classmate, an elderly man writing letters of encouragement to prisoners whom no one else remembered. The contemplation of these new flowers blooming filled me with an indescribable emotion. Each was a living testimony that, even in the darkest moments of human history, love continued to flourish in silence, like small lights of hope in the darkness. "Look carefully," Jesus told me, pointing to a group of flowers that seemed to dance with their own light. "These represent the chains of kindness that a single action can unleash." I approached and saw the story of a man who, without knowing it, had started a revolution of kindness. It all began when he decided to pay for the coffee of the person behind him in a cafe. This simple act inspired that person to do the same, and so on, until hundreds of people were involved in a chain of generosity that lasted several days. "But that was just the beginning. Kindness," explained Jesus with a smile that illuminated the entire garden, "has the power to multiply in ways we cannot imagine." I saw how one of the people affected by that coffee chain decided, inspired by that random act of kindness, to start a mentoring program for at-risk youth. That program transformed dozens of lives, which in turn transformed other lives, creating a domino effect of positive change that continued expanding like ripples in a pond. As we watched, the flowers began to interconnect with threads of light, showing how each act of kindness was related to thousands of others, creating a luminous network of love that extended as far as the eye could see. "Each decision to love," continued Jesus, "no matter how small it may seem, has the potential to change the world. Observe this." He pointed me to an apparently modest flower, but whose inner glow was extraordinary. In it I saw the story of an elderly woman who lived alone in a small apartment. Each day without fail, she baked extra cookies and left them on the building stairs with a note that said, "Take one if you need to smile today." She never knew how many lives she touched with this simple gesture. I saw a stressed businessman who, thanks to those cookies and that note, decided not to take his life that day. I saw a teenager who, inspired by that act of anonymous kindness, started her own project of encouragement notes in her school, transforming the culture of bullying into one of mutual support. I saw a single mother who, on a particularly difficult day, found hope in that small gesture of love. "The seeds of love that we plant," said Jesus as we walked among flowers that now seemed to tell interconnected stories, "grow in ways we cannot foresee." A new section of the garden revealed itself before us, where the flowers seemed to be made of liquid light and music. Here, each flower represented acts of forgiveness that had transformed entire lives. I saw a woman who had forgiven the drunk driver who had killed her son, and how that act of forgiveness had led the man to transform his life and dedicate himself to preventing others from making the same mistake. I saw a man who had forgiven decades of family abuse and had broken the cycle of violence, creating a new legacy of love for his own children. "Forgiveness," explained Jesus with a voice that contained all the love of the universe, "is one of the most powerful forms of secret love, because forgiving when no one expects you to, when no one knows you have done it, is an act of pure love." The flowers in this section of the garden had an especially intense glow, as if the act of forgiving created a brighter light than any other form of love. I saw stories of reconciliation, of chains of hatred broken by a simple, "I forgive you," whispered in the solitude of the heart. As we advanced, we reached a clearing where the flowers seemed to form a circular pattern, like a dance frozen in time. Here, each flower represented moments of intercessory prayer, people who dedicated hours in silence to pray for others, without anyone knowing.